everyone, it's Tammy Pally, aka the Crafty Princess, and I have been making doll clothes. So I thought, gee, why don't I do a video about tips that I have started to use and collect as I have made some Blythe doll dresses. I should also point out that actually this is one of the reasons why I like the Blythe dolls over so many other wonderful dolls out there like pull-ups and BJDs, and I love all the dolls, but Blythe dolls lend themselves more to crafting, and I'm all about making stuff. I like to make things, and so there's a lot of projects that I can use my crafting skills and coordinate with my doll collecting. So in fact, for a while I've been making crocheted items like little crocheted dresses and purses and that sort of thing. But back in the day, I used to sew quite a bit, and I was fairly skilled at it. But I just, got to the point where most of the clothing that I wanted to make was extremely time intensive, and I mean make for myself. So, and also things kind of changed. When I grew up, clothing that you bought in the store was quite expensive. I only had maybe a couple of store-bought dresses in my life as a child. So my mother made pretty much almost all of our clothing, and except for my school uniforms. So I had a little bit of experience with sewing, and things have changed quite a bit. It's much more expensive to sew for yourself than to just go to a store like Walmart and buy clothing. So anyway, I'm back to sewing again, but I've had to reawaken my sewing skills, which were pretty rusty. And as I did that, like I said, I started to realize, there's a lot to this thing called sewing. It's a lot of knowledge that you have to collect over a period of time. And I will be sharing more about my sewing with the dolls. But here's the first video, and it's tips. So first tip is make sure you have plenty of lighting and a good area that you can spread out in. I'm in a spare room here. That we are lucky to have. It's not a huge room, it's quite a small room, but it's kind of our junk studio space for me that is a free zone from any pets, children, the occasional husband who peeks his head in, kind of thing. So I'm able to work in here and have things like, pins and stuff that I don't have to worry about somebody getting their little paws on. So yeah, you need to have a good space, and that kind of connects to the next tip, which is to take your time, because if you make a mistake, it's really a good idea. I mean, a big mistake. If it's a little mistake, no biggie. But if you make like a big mistake, like you sew two pieces together that you shouldn't have, usually it's a good time to kind of take a break. So you want to be able to leave all your stuff out. You don't have to put it back every single time you want to make something. I know this isn't, always possible for everyone. But if you can do it at all, try to. Even if it's like taking over the bathroom for the weekend or something like that. Yeah, it's very, very helpful if you could do that. But otherwise, yeah, take your time and don't rush through things, because you will just make more mistakes. Seriously, if you think you're just going to rush through something, that's one of the things about sewing as compared to a lot of other crafts that I've tried. You have to be pretty meticulous. You have to pay a lot of attention to detail, more so than I would say, for example, with crochet. Crochet I like because it's very portable, it's very forgiving. So taking your time leads to the next little tip, which is pay attention to detail. It's quite important. You want to make sure that you spend time and you're careful about, finishing off items. And in fact, for me, one of the things I remember when I was a child that bothered me sometimes when I had handmade clothing was a lot of times, my mother was busy. She had 3 girls that she was making clothing for, and a lot of times the clothing were things just like, shorts and t-shirts and things we would just run around and play in. And so she was, she was whipping those things out as fast as she could. And so she didn't do things like finish the seams and that sort of thing. And because she was really doing it not just because she liked to do it, it was a requirement to help the family be able to afford to do things like go to parochial school. Okay, so that always kind of bothered me, that the clothing sometimes wasn't really finished that well. And it makes such a huge difference if you just do little things like finish the seams, you know, zigzag or use a serger stitch or something like that. Or if you're lucky enough to have a serger, that's even, you know, nicer. But yeah, take some time and make sure that you spend the extra effort to finish your clothing as much as possible, because it does matter. The finished product will be so much better. You'll be so much happier with it. So it's worth the time investment, in my personal opinion. Okay, so another little tip is, one of the things with sewing these clothes is that you have teeny tiny seam allowance. The seams that, the size of your seams, which is where your stitches go together, is 1/4 of an inch. Now, if you're going a straight seam, that's not a big deal. In fact, usually your presser foot on your machine, the edge from the fabric to the inside of the where your needle's at is almost always going to be 1/4 of an inch, depending on, you know, the construction of your machine. Most of them are going to be like that. But when you're going around curved areas like this, your foot moves. So it's kind of hard to see stuff sometimes. So one of the little things I've been doing is I've been taking a fine tip marker and a little ruler and going around and marking 1/4 of an inch, just little dots here and there, to kind of help me on the curved areas keep track, to make sure that it's as close to 1/4 of an inch as I can. You know, you want to make sure you're not doing something where this is going to be seen. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That's been handy for me. As far as tool goes, this little ruler's been super handy. So a little ruler like this. Small scissors, tiny scissors that are very sharp. These are Ginger scissors. I have a pair of larger Ginger scissors that, you know, these are like the sewing machine. You know, if you're a seamstress, you want a good pair of scissors, and you will only use these for fabric, nothing other than fabric. You will ruin your scissors if you use them on paper or cardboard or anything other than fabric. You will ruin your scissors, so don't do that. But it's worth investing in a small pair, because again, when you're cutting out your pattern, you have small areas that you have to cut into, and it can be really tricky if you have a huge pair of scissors. So yeah, small scissors, that's a really good tip that you want to have. Let's see, and along with that, another tool is a pair of pliers. In particular, these are bent nose pliers that I use for jewelry making, and they're pretty small. A lot of times with doll clothes, they're lined on the inside, so you have to turn things from inside to outside, from outside to inside, and this fits down into little areas like this. So these are real handy. Next tip, save your scraps. Little pieces like this could be made into a couple of pockets that you could stitch to the front of a dress. Okay. You know, you can use little bits and pieces like this for accessories, or little, you know, hair bits or bows or that kind of thing. So don't just, if they're, you know, fairly decent size like this, something like this for a doll items is worth keeping. That's a lot of fabric in the dolly world, right? And let's see, what about the other thing? Read through your instructions before you start. I purchased some instructions from this Etsy shop, $5, and then after I purchased this, she sent me a 20% off coupon, and I purchased some more of her $5 Blythe patterns. But you want to make sure before you thread a needle, sit down and read through this. Because I'm a teacher, I'm an academic person, so I have to annotate. I can't help myself. But I think it's helpful to spend some time reading ahead, studying what you're going to do. You're going to refer to it as you will refer to it as you sew, but you don't want to have to just refer to it and never have read it at all. Also, you might have a question or two, right? So if you have a question or two, I did have a question and I emailed her and she answered it. So if I had waited I was in the middle and then had to stop because I had this question, that would not have been very handy. So definitely read the instructions. There are a lot of free patterns out on the interwebs, but I have to say I have found most of them to be quite vague as far as instructions. So Even this I found to be worth the $5, but not the clearest thing in the world to understand. So, but I was successful. I have made multiple dresses using this pattern, and I have bought more patterns from her because I think it's worth it. So, another item is look at doll clothes that you have purchased from other people who make doll clothes, which I'm assuming if you're at the point where you want to make doll clothes for your Blythe dolls or Barbies or whatever, it might be something that you've already been collecting. I mean, actually part of the Blythe addiction is collecting Blythe accessories and clothes and shoes and all that kind of stuff. So I found it helpful to use this, and she also had a free PDF file that she sends to you when you purchase this, and also using pre-made items I already purchased and looking at the inside of them to see how they were constructed, because I don't know, just visually it helped me a lot. Here, as an example, let me reach over here. Here's one I bought from, I believe this is a mini Jijo, and I was able to, for example, see the snaps. See, this is on the inside, this is on the outside. Little things like that can save you a considerable amount of time when you're just not crystal clear on what you're doing. And finally, number 10 is make one item first before you get crazy and want to make 20 items. These actually lend themselves to kind of assembly line sewing, but I would really recommend making one or two before you decide you're going to make 20 at one time. And that is because that way you have a really good solid understanding of the techniques that you're doing for each one. And but it is helpful to do them more, you know, do 2 or 3 dresses at once for things. For example, I like to for example, when I turn things inside and out, for example, like this, I used my iron and pressed it, but I'm making 2 or 3 dresses right now at the same time, so I was able to turn, you know, not have to have the iron on for pressing one tiny little thing like this. I pressed a bunch of stuff at one time, and but that's after I made a few of these already. So this wasn't like my very first, you know, one that I cut out 20 at one time. So yeah, don't get all crazy assembly line sewing until you have a couple of these completed and under your belt. But otherwise, that's it. I'm having a really good time making these little dresses, and I have more sewing plans in the works. So as usual, I always appreciate you guys stopping by, giving me thumbs up, subscribing, hitting the little bell so you get a notification, and that's it. Have a wonderful Dolly Day. Goodbye.